Hello and welcome to Spellbook by the Letters, your weekly alphabetical look at the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Spellbook. Each week we take a look at 7 spells, and I will rate them on a variety of criteria, including who should be casting it, how powerful I think it is, and just overall how useful is this spell. You're going to find that not all spells are created equally as we jump right in. Our first spell that we're going to talk about today is Blinding Smite. Blinding Smite is a paladin spell. It is a 3rd level spell here. It has a casting time of 1 bonus action, a range of self, vocal components, and concentration of up to 1 minute. So, like all of the other Paladin Smite spells, it is a concentration spell that you concentrate on to empower your weapon so that your next time you hit with a melee weapon, it has an additional effect. For this one, it deals an additional 3d8 radiant damage, and it forces a Constitution saving throw. If the target fails on a Constitution saving throw, then they will be blinded at the end of each of their turns. They can make that save again, and on a success, they end the blindness. So it's a paladin spell, so we don't need to talk about who should be casting it. Let's talk about the components of Blinding Smite. It has vocal components only, so I think something like Begone, Sight, for your components for Blinding Smite is really, really fun. Let's rate this spell. I think this is a really, really solid spell. It is a 3rd level spell, so it's coming in at 9th level for Paladins. So it takes a little bit of time. But that 3rd level spell, compare it to Blindness Deafness. Now, there are a few differences. This takes concentration. Blindness Deafness does not. This is a 3rd level spell for a blind. Blindness Deafness is a 2nd level spell. So on those two metrics, Blindness Deafness seems better. But this is a bonus action to cast, and then it can be delivered with a regular attack. So you aren't losing out on damage per round with this. And it adds an additional 3d8 radiant damage no matter what. So that's not a great rate. That's the rate of a 1st level spell. But it's a decent rate. Like, it is something, and unlike a lot of other spells, that is you fire it off and you hit or you miss, this is going to stay on your sword until you either lose concentration or until you hit. So even if you miss an attack or two, you can keep coming at it and eventually get that hit in. I think this is a really solid spell. It has its differences with Blindness Deafness, which I also think is a solid spell, as we'll see. But honestly, for a 3rd level spell, being able to pretty significantly disable an enemy, it's not the strongest disable in the game, but for a bonus action, keeping up your DPR, it's a really, really solid choice for a frontliner. Our next spell that we're going to be talking about is Blindness Deafness. Like I said, it's very similar to Blinding Smite. Let's look at the differences. Blindness Deafness is a 2nd level necromancy spell, casting time of 1 action, a range of 30 feet. It requires only vocal components and have a duration of 1 minute. You get to choose to blind or deafen a foe. Unless you have a really weird story reason to need to deafen a foe, you're almost always going to be blinding them. If the target fails the con save, they are blinded, and then, like Blinding Smite, on the end of each of their rounds, they can make the con save again. On a success, they are no longer blinded. This spell you can upcast to hit multiple targets. So each level is an additional target. 3rd level, you get another target at 2 targets. 4th level is 3 targets, and so on. It's 1 level lower than the Blinding Smite, and it's a pretty solid disable, but this is it is one all or nothing spell. You are either getting them blind or you're doing nothing. So there is no like halfway like the Blinding Smite, at least getting you some damage in the bonus radiant damage. But what I really, really like about this spell, and I think the thing that goes most often overlooked, is it is a fairly powerful disabling spell that does not require concentration. And that cannot be overlooked. For bards, clerics, sorcerers, and wizards, all have a lot of great concentration spells. You can throw out like a bless or a bane or a haste, and then you can be using this spell, Blindness Deafness, to further control the battlefield. It's a very rare battlefield control spell that does not require concentration, and for that I think that it deserves a mention. Our third spell that we're going to be talking about today is Blink. Blink is a sorcerer wizard spell. It is a third level transmutation with a casting time of 1 action, a range of self, vocal and somatic components required, and a duration of 1 minute. For Blink, essentially you target yourself. End of each year round, you roll a d20. 11 or higher, so a 50% chance, you go to the ethereal plane. And you stay there until either your spell ends or your next turn starts. So you're not going to be spending any of your actual turns on the ethereal plane. And then at that time, you return. You go exactly within 10 feet of where you were. And then if there is no space, you go a little bit further, determined randomly. While in the ethereal plane, you can see and hear into the material plane, but you cannot interact with it. You can only interact with anything that is on the material plane. Creatures that can't perceive into the ethereal plane cannot see you. And they cannot interact with you unless they have a special ability that allows them to interact with creatures on the ethereal plane. I'm not a huge fan of this spell simply because I don't like spells that just, it's a 50-50 shot on if you even get anything out of it. So, but it doesn't require concentration, and it could be looked at as it's a 50-50 shot that you become untargetable on your turn. So for that, it's really, really good. But it does take an action, so it is eating a round of combat. And I feel like with third level spells, often you just have better things that you can be doing to lock down the battlefield and give your allies an advantage on that first or second round when this spell is most useful to cast. The other thing that you should really keep in mind is if you are a caster that has things to do with reactions, Blink would also shut that down. So if you're a wizard or sorcerer who likes to counterspell a lot, or you have the chaos sorcerer ability to subtract a d4 from things as a reaction, or you are the ab wizard that likes to ward and use your ward for other people, there's a lot of things that Blink shuts you down from doing, so you have to be wary of that. Third spell we're talking about today, or fourth spell actually that we're talking about today, is Blur. Blur is a second level illusion. It is a sorcerer wizard spell with a casting time of 1 action, a range of self, vocal components, and duration of concentration up to a minute. Blurred essentially gives all enemies disadvantage on attack rolls. Any attacker that does not rely on sight is immune to this effect. And if they have true sight as well, they would also be immune to this effect. I don't like Blur. I think it's bad. It eats your concentration for a second level spell on giving enemies a disadvantage to attack you. You can be doing better things with your second level spells. You can actually be advancing the fight forward. You can be controlling the battlefield. Do not waste your second level spell on Blur. If you're going to use a second level spell to protect yourself, give yourself Mirror Image. It occupies the same space, but will not eat your concentration. And unless you're a high AC sorcerer or wizard, you might have a better chance of avoiding an attack or two with Mirror Image than you will with Blur. Don't take Blur. For the components for Blur, it only requires vocal components. So I think, where am I? That's that. Our fifth spell that we're going to talk about today is Branding Smite. Branding Smite is a second level evocation. It is a paladin spell, much like the other Smite that we talked about. A bonus action, casting time, range of self, concentration up to a minute. And it empowers your sword so that it has an additional effect on your next strike. It deals an additional 2d6 radiant damage on hit. Additionally, if you hit a target, that target cannot be invisible as it sheds a dim light. So it's pretty solid, and you can upcast this for an additional d6 of damage. I don't recommend upcasting this. You can save your higher slots for your actual smites, and those will be adding more damage as you upcast for your regular paladin smite. But this spell's niche But if your party doesn't have a lot of ways to interact with invisible creatures, this is a spell you should have prepared. At the very least, if you don't use it, you can just be activating your smites. But if you come up against something invisible and you can land this on them, you are going to be very happy that you did so, and your party is going to be very thankful because this makes them seen and targetable by everybody in your party. So it's a really, really solid way for a second level spell. The only disadvantage is you do have to figure out where they are and you have to hit them with it first. But once you do that, they're done. Or if you need to lock down an enemy caster and you're scared they're going to go invisible on you, this prevents those shenanigans before it starts. For the components, I think I've got my eye on you. For our next spell, we're going to do the last of the bees, Burning Hands. It is a sorcerer wizard spell. It is a first level spell, an evocation spell. Casting time of 1 action, a range of self in a 15-foot cone emanating from you. A components of vocal and somatic, and a duration of instantaneous. So you pick a 15-foot cone, and you do 3d6 fire damage to every creature within that cone. And anything that's flammable, that's unattended, it is lit on fire. And then you can upcast it for an additional d6 of damage for each level that you upcast it. This is really solid damage. 3d6 for a first level spell is not a bad rate, and having the option to hit multiple targets is pretty nice. Obviously, 3d6 isn't amazing damage, but at lower levels, especially for taking care of the types of enemies that you fight at lower levels, Burning Hands does serious work. It can often wipe out 2 or 3 goblins or kobolds or even like enemy bandits with the single casting. The only real disadvantage is that you do have to get up close on a sorcerer or a wizard. So unless you're playing a sorcerer or a wizard that has a pretty solid AC, either from mage armor or from like the draconic bloodlines ability, plus some dexterity, you could be putting yourself in harm's way that you might not be prepared to deal with. But I really do like Burning Hands, and if you're playing a sorcerer or wizard that isn't afraid of getting up in the fight, give this spell a decent chance. It's really, really solid. The components for Burning Hands, being vocal and somatic, I think are it's getting hot in here. Something like that. Our next spell is Call Lightning. Call Lightning is a 3rd level druid spell, a conjuration spell with a casting time of 1 action, a range of 120 feet, vocal and somatic components, and concentration up to 10 minutes. Call Lightning allows you to pick a point within range. Each creature within 5 feet of that point must make a dexterity save. Verse is 3d10 lightning damage. So this can hit multiple creatures if they're right next to each other. It does 3d10 lightning damage, and then each round as your action, you can do it again, and you can do it again, and you can do it again. So 3d10 isn't a great rate for a first level spell, or for a 3d10 isn't a great rate for a 3rd level spell, but a continuous 3d10 damage that you can use over and over and over each turn isn't bad. Additionally, this spell upcasts nicely, getting an additional d10 for each level of the spell. So it definitely has some upsides to it. It does have some downsides. If you cast it in a storm that's already there, you get an additional d10, which is nice. But if you don't have 60 feet of unimpeded space to create a storm cloud, the spell fails. If you're doing underground environments a lot, Call Lightning is going to be very bad. There's going to be a lot of instances that you find yourself unable to cast this spell. But if you do a lot of outdoor environments in your campaign, Call Lightning is going to be a solid pickup. The place that I really want to call it out is actually a place where it's not normally seen. The Tempest Cleric gets Call Lightning, and it is going to be amazing there. It synergizes incredibly well with their Channel Divinity, allowing them to maximize lightning damage with. And if you upcast Call Lightning, say you cast Call Lightning as a 5th level spell, as a Tempest Cleric, your first time you're going to be able to just drop a solid 50 damage. It's a great spell to maximize with that. It's really, really good. But yeah, so it has some issues, Call Lightning, but in the right campaign, it can really shine, and that should be something that you know before picking it up and going in. Additionally, the casters that it's on are prepared casters, so they can just not prepare it for that day, and then they're going to be fine. The components for Call Lightning, I think, is storm clouds gather and storm clouds rage. Strike down! Something like that. So, we've reached the end of the episode. This episode, I noticed we didn't have a lot of who should be casting this spell, because really any of these spells were great for the list that they were on. There weren't any real niche spells that didn't really need to be on any specific list that they were on. Every spell, if it's on the spell list, go ahead and pick it up and cast it. Besides Blur, never cast Blur. Just don't even think about it. But yeah, I hope that you all had fun with this episode. I know that I did recording it. That's 7 more spells in the spellbook. Hopefully you all learned something. I gotta give a big shout out to our mother podcast, Dear Dungeon. It's a D&D advice show that I do with my friend Audrey, where we take your questions and we give you advice. It's really, really fun, so why not check it out? If you're interested in any more stuff that me and my friends are doing, you can check out hopepunkpress.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter for updates, you can follow me at The Lost Samurai 7 on Twitter. And finally, it's media rec time. I'm going to recommend one piece of media or something that somebody cool is doing. And today I want to call out a Twitter account. Specifically, Cardboard DM. They make really, really cool cardboard like scenery. Like, I'm talking like they have made ships, and they have made like little stalls and like all sorts of like town scenery for D&D games, and it's really, really cool. It's Cardboard DM at Twitter. You can go check it out. They have so many cool pictures and so much really cool stuff for inspiration made out of like paper towel rolls and old boxes and all of that. So really great do-it-yourself, like thrifty inspiration to enhance your tabletop. But that's all that we've got time for. Class is dismissed, and I'll see you next week.